Hi there and welcome back to the Duke of Scottish News here in Geneva. Joining me today is Richard Watts to discuss movement from bulk shipping to containers. So Richard, welcome back to the studios.
Thank you.
So it's hard for us to remember that containers haven't always been around. So can you explain how different cargoes are carried?
Well, as we've discussed in the past, the market of the shipping is absolutely vast. And so we can split it down into container transportation, into bulk or liquid. We can also break it down into raw homogeneous commodities or packaged commodities and manufactured goods. Now, as far as the liquid and the bulk, that's always been quite straightforward and quite simple because it just gets pushed into a vessel and taken out at the destination. And the cargo itself, it's not that easy to actually break the cargo. It's the manufactured goods that's always been a problem. And so the problem is that it takes a long time to load it at the loading port, it takes a long time to discharge, you have to be very, very careful with the stowage of it. And so these individual items of manufactured goods were always causing a problem, and they were delaying the expansion of vessels to carry them and ports to handle them. And so then we ended up with what we have now, the container to handle those manufactured goods.
So how did we get the present day container?
Well, the container is quite a recent invention. It was back in the 1960s that Malcolm McLean was working on various projects for transportation, and he came up with, working with an engineer called Keith Klankliger, and they came up with the container, the modern day container. So we have here, which is 20 foot long, 8 foot by 8 foot. And we also have different varieties of it, so we have 40 foot, but it's a very interesting development because it's modular. They're all exactly the same shape and size. It can be connected at the corners, so it just fits together like Lego. It's very, very strong vertically, so you can stack them up many on top of each other, and we have many different types of containers. So we have containers carrying just normal goods, any type of goods. We have containers which are open top, we have high cubic containers, we have containers for grain, we have containers for liquid, for transporting oil on board. And so we have many, many different types of containers now, and they become a very, very versatile product.
And what kind of commodities are we seeing being transported by containers?
Well, traditionally it's always been manufactured goods, because it was manufactured goods where there was the problem, and so it was these goods that it was very, very useful to load them into the containers at the point of manufacturing, and then they would be transported in the same container all the way through to the destination. And so we were seeing manufactured goods, goods that we would buy, but we weren't seeing very many raw materials. We weren't seeing many of the bulk cargoes being shipped at the time.
So why are we seeing some commodities switch to containers?
Well, it all breaks down to cost and convenience. First of all, as far as the cost is concerned, it's much, much easier to transport small quantities by containers. So say, for example, if I'm looking at a homogeneous cargo, such as grain, maybe rice, then what I would traditionally do is I would load the cargo onto a vessel which carrying 35,000 tonnes of cargo, and it would transport it from Asia to West Africa. Now, the problem with that is that, first of all, it's quite a large cargo. There's a large amount of money involved. I have to get a lot of financing from the bank. I need to have a proper insurance in place for it, and I need to have a supplier who can provide that amount of cargo in one go, and a buyer who can pay for that amount of cargo in one go. And so we're seeing this shift over to containers, purely because then people can work with smaller quantities of any commodity, and also there's a lot less damage. So there's lots of opportunity for the people handling the cargo to have access to it, to damage the cargo while it's being handled, and also to steal the cargo, because a lot of these cargoes do get stolen. So we're seeing a lot of different commodities moving over. I mean, rice is a very good example. When I started working in the rice trade back in 2000, we had about 1 million tonnes a year of rice being transported. If we had 5,000 tonnes of rice in containers, it was a lot. Today, Thailand is one of the largest exporters in the world, and 70% of their exports are in containers. And so we're seeing this move very, very, very quickly, and we're seeing it in more and more different commodities.
Fantastic. And what other changes are we seeing?
Well, we're seeing continued movement of different commodities into containers. Things like bitumen are being transported in containers now, because then they can be transported all the way to the destination where the roads are being constructed, for example. But we're also seeing the containers are taking over some of the ports as well. We're seeing them, taking over the ports by the container vessels have priority whenever they go into the ports. Other vessels can get delayed because of the container vessels. But we're also seeing the three largest container lines, MSC, CMA and Maersk, who are building larger and larger and larger vessels. And so we're seeing ourselves in a situation where they're really going for the economies of scale, but we're almost getting to the point where the vessels are simply ludicrously big. And we have, for example, the MSC Zoe, which is the largest vessel that exists, the largest container vessel which exists at the moment, which can carry almost 20,000 containers. So we're talking about 200,000 tons of cargo. It's about 250 meters long. It has a depth of about 16 meters. And so it's just a very, very, very large vessel. And we're seeing this going more and more and more. Now, the only worry is once we've all started transporting cargo by container, are the rates going to stay low, or is there going to be a readjustment at that point?
Absolutely. Well, Richard, thank you so much for coming in today. As always, it was a pleasure having you here in the studios.
Thank you.
Well, that's all that we have time for today, but for all the latest Dukascopy updates, do keep clicking back. Goodbye for now.